Thank you everyone for coming to STAP Science Day, the Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel of the Global Environment Facility. I am Rosina Bierbaum and very honored to be the chair of this committee. I want to first say that this conference center is on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. We are most grateful that we are gathering on lands and waters that these nations have stewarded since time immemorial. And it's wonderful to be here and to celebrate the replenishment of the GEF Trust Fund, which will help countries around the world meet their global environmental commitments to conserve biodiversity, to tackle climate change, to deal with adaptation to climate change, to improve land management, and to reduce harmful chemicals and waste, and manage their transboundary waters. And they will soon, we hope and know, embrace two treaties, one to reduce plastic and to protect the ocean. We're very honored to open today by having the CEO of the GEF, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, here to say a few words in Open Science Day. He very much likes to say he's a lawyer by profession, a politician by choice, and a conservationist at heart. He served 3 years as the Minister of Environment and Energy in Costa Rica, and during that time, he doubled the size of its forests. He made the electricity sector 100% clean and renewable, and was really a pioneer in valuing nature and the payment for ecosystem services. But he's also a great student of nature and a great teacher of the wonders of nature with an almost encyclopedic memory of genus and species. And he's dedicated also to empowering youth and indigenous peoples, to helping science to improve the environment and the achievement of an equitable and sustainable world. So I give you the CEO of the GEF, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez.
Muy buenos días. Good morning. Thanks, Rosina, for your very kind introduction. And I'm super happy and thrilled to be here at the GEF Assembly. My big thanks to the host government in Canada, and yes, of course, the First Nations are the very important co-hosts for this week. This is the I've been lucky enough because my professional career has been very close to the GEF and what the GEF partnership has done through the years. This is my 5th GEF Assembly, and yes, of course, I'm very honored to kind of lead this one. But in every single one before, the setting was very different to what we have today here. In every single GEF Assembly, we gather around, we try to bring the science, we try to bring the evidence and the impact of what we do, and we think how we can do much better. Otherwise, as climate change, loss of biodiversity, and pollution will create an existential challenge to all of us. So every single GEF Assembly plans to deal with those global challenges. This will be the first GEF Assembly that we will work during the planetary crisis. So every time in the past, we were planning to avoid the most hardest impacts of climate change, loss of biodiversity, and pollution. And I think that in a sense, we have failed big time. Just look outside the window and look what is happening to British Columbia today. A month ago, I woke up in my home in Washington. I was heading to my office, and the haze was incredible. And I asked, what is this haze all about? And he said, it's Carlos Manuel, big forest fires in Canada. And I was in Washington. Today, a month later, I'm in Vancouver, and 2 days ago, I wake up and I was unable to see the sun because of the haze of the forest fires. The crisis is here. It's not something of the future. And during this assembly, we need to recognize that this is the moment for us, the GEF partnership, to really think how we are going to deal with this crisis. And I don't think that we will be successful thinking on doing the same thing and just bringing more money into the table. That is not going to work. And so this is a wonderful opportunity for all of us to really recognize what the whole of a society approach means. Yes, for the last decade, we've been recognizing that it is not enough working with the governments. And just when we talk about working with the governments, we tend to believe that governments are a single-cell body, but reality tells us that it's a very complex body. And we tend to believe that just by having ministers of environment attending the international events and agreeing on ambitious targets is enough. The Minister of Environment goes back, let me put a hypothetical case to reflect the level of challenges that we're confronted with. Let's say we go to COP28 later this year, and there's a discussion on how to phase out oil and gas, which, by the way, is not happening, but let's say that discussion happens. So we got ministers, developing countries, primarily ministers of environment, and they agree on a roadmap to phase out oil and gas. That minister needs to go back home, and he will be confronted immediately with the Minister of Energy of that country, who probably was a guy who was trained to do oil and gas. And we pretend to think that by just generating that agreement with just one political stakeholder, things will change. Well, evidence and history has proven that that doesn't work. The GEF needs to recognize two very important things, and those two very important things are topics that the GEF Secretariat, the GEF Council, and the GEF Partnership will promote a discussion throughout the next week, during this week, whereby we need to really understand what it means, a whole of a government approach and a whole of a society approach. Otherwise, if we continue to work just with one key politician in the executive branches of the countries, we'll never achieve those goals and those objectives. So this assembly will set the basis of what the GEF Secretariat, staff, and all the larger partnership should be thinking that should be embedded in the core of the discussion of the next replenishment. And my recommendation is think outside of the box, and every idea is welcome, because you just need to look outside of the window and see what is happening. Flood, forest fires, heat waves, I mean, you name it, you name it. A month ago, I was attending a board meeting of a very important organization called the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund, CEPF. I was in Morocco. We went to the field to see projects, and I was there, my first time ever, in the outdoors at 42.5 centigrades. 42.5. I never in my life experienced such a hot environment. And it reminds me that hot weather, it was so hot that I had to run from the shaded tree to the car. It reminds me of my childhood in Costa Rica when there was a rainstorm. We ran into the car to avoid getting wet. This time, I ran into the car because the heat was so intense that it was painful. And this is the reality that we will be confronted with. That day, there was 40 degrees in southern US. That day, there was 40 degrees in southern Europe. That day, 40 degrees in China. Nevertheless, we see political processes like, the G20 ministerial meeting, where 80% of the emissions were present there, and countries were not able to agree on simple language with regards to the implementation of the Paris Agreement, particularly on climate mitigation. And that is the context that we have in front of us. I, myself, as the CEO of the GEF, I will be pushing in a very aggressive but sound manner new ways by which the GEF and the GEF partnership can really address this triple planetary crisis. And that triple planetary crisis means that the GEF needs to expand from where we are. And where we are? Well, we are the largest environmental fund, working with 150 countries. But once more, we are just working with the executive branch. The whole of the government approach needs to be a very comprehensive and a strategic approach whereby in the future the GEF should be working beyond the executive branch. Well, within the executive branch, we need to go across the executive branch. And one idea on how we can really mainstream the GEF investment within national development policies is by expanding on our structure of operational focal points. Normally, the operational focal point in the recipient countries is somebody from the Ministry of Environment. So what comes to us in terms of the Paris Agreement, the GBF, the chemicals conventions are the priorities of the Ministries of Environment, which are not necessarily the priorities of the central government. And most probably, there is not even a political dialogue on how the central government should address their international commitments. So we need to be there providing the finance and the building of capacity for that dialogue to be consistent. We need to avoid for the Minister of Environment going to the COP and then going back home and trying to convince the Minister of Energy, the Minister of Agriculture, and the Minister of Finance. So the GEF is looking into a new model whereby instead of having an operational focal point, a single person from the Ministry of Environment, we need to have a steering committee where you got at least these 3 or 4 executive branch agencies which are key in the implementation of the Paris Agreement, the CBD agreements, and the chemicals and land degradations. And we are heading into that direction. As a matter of fact, there's a handful of countries that they don't have an operational focal point, a single person rather than a steering committee, and when you see what is coming to GEF, those projects coming from a steering committee where you got 5 or 6 representatives of the government, they have more ambition in terms of the system change and the structural reforms. As we look into the executive branch and what the GEF should be doing, the same thing with national congresses and parliaments, because at the end of the day, all political decisions need to go one way or another to national parliaments and congresses, and we do little in support of that. And I think that that's another important key element. But today and this week, probably the most innovative ideas will come with regards to how the GEF will finance actions within civil society, non-state actors. And this is critical and important because we all need to recognize that we got a problem, and the problem cannot be solved by doing exactly the same thing that we have done in the past, and the only big idea is to bring more resources. Here, we need to recognize that unless the GEF moves into a mechanism that becomes a key provider of financial investment to civil society and stakeholders, unless we do that, we are not going to be able to do progress in the rest of this decade with regards to the 1.5, the 30%, and the pollution-free environment that we wish. The youth is critical in this context, and working with the youth is instrumental as there are many global challenges. Some of them are, political challenges. North and South has quite different impression on how to do things regarding a just transition. The East and the West, they got quite a few issues, particularly on trade. But most importantly, for me, the biggest challenge is the generational gap within the actual generation that is taking decisions in government and private sector with the aspiration of the youth and the young kids that feel that their future is totally compromised for what our generation has done. I hope that by the end of this week, we at the GEF Secretariat are able to capture broad, big lines on how the GEF need to expand and be more impactful. And by that, I mean we need to really continue bringing more resources and being more strategic and investing in policy coherence and doing the whole of the government approach at the same time that the GEF needs to move towards a, I will say, new paradigm of financial support towards civil society. I want to challenge everybody in this partnership and agree with me that the GEF should mobilize 10% of their financial resources directly to civil society by 2030. If we agree on this goal, we will be talking about large sums of money being channeled in a very strategic manner with civil society in ways which are very different to what GEF today operates. I'm very, very interested to speak at the technical level on access, indirect access to civil society and non-state actors with regards to that. If we don't do that, most probably forest fires and those extreme weather events will continue to put a big pressure in an already stressful global society that we have today. Today, Science Day looks at the young scientists, the young conservationists, the young practitioners. With the GEF, we feel that we have a moral responsibility to provide strategic financial support to the youth in their aspiration for a better world. And later this week, we'll be giving more details of the Gustavo Fonseca Fellowship Program, which precisely looks to do that, to financially support the training of young scientists, to financially support the research of these young scientists. And we're thrilled that we got a lot of partners, GEF partners, willing to join us in this effort of providing sustainable funding for the youth in their aspiration of becoming scientists. And yes, of course, every scientist will have once in their life a big shot to be a decision maker, helping him achieve his goals of the system change. So thank you for the opportunity of being today here during the Science Day. It's a day that we will do a lot of emphasis on the youth and the next generation, but also this is a great opportunity for us to really understand how do we share lessons, how do we manage the knowledge, which are in the basis of what we do. I constantly feel as CEO frustrated to have this large network and not being able to maximize the learned lessons. I'm very frustrated not to be able yet to consolidate and create a South-South network of collaboration within stakeholders and within our partners. So thank you so much, Rosina, for the invitation. We are honored to have Rashid with us, putting the real context of the science and the options with regards to the big challenges that we have in the ocean. Sylvia Earle said that without the blue, there is no green. And we need to really understand the interconnections within these large ecosystems. As the GEF moves towards becoming the partner of choice of new international agreements, as the GEF consolidates the family of trust funds, we look forward to assume big responsibilities regarding new international treaties like BBNJ. And in this week, we'll be talking a lot about our ideas and our efforts to implement these new international agreements. So thank you so much.
Well, that was an amazing lecture. I think you gave Rashid and my lecture. Thank you so much, Carlos Manuel. Before we actually move into the presentations, I think to follow up on your comment that we need innovative thinking, that we need to think across ministries, that we need to think across topics, across multilateral environmental agreements, that I would be remiss if I did not call up for a few words our GEF council member from the Netherlands, who is from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but all these official titles, Director of Inclusive Green Growth Development, Ambassador of Sustainable Development, and Arctic Ambassador. And so I asked for a few words from Renee Van Hel. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, and also for all of those here in the room that think, what is this old guy going to tell us? I mean, what has he been done in his whole life about where we are now? My first serious job was one in which we prepared ourselves for the Earth Summit in '92. So I'm very proud again to be here at the GEF, but I very much like also to echo my frustration and irritation, but also my level of ambition that the CEO of the GEF just voiced. We know an awful lot, and indeed we need also science, but the science has been there already for quite a while. So what are we doing wrong? And I think it indeed has something to do with this whole of government, whole of society kind of approach that is lacking. Too often, the GEF was something for the ministers of environment, and they could just sort of play with it. But increasingly, I hope and think and see, and also if I look at my country, where finally, after all those years, we're taking truly responsibility for being part of the 80% of the greenhouse gas emissioners, that there is more of a whole of government society. When our Prime Minister, when our Minister of Finance, or our Minister of Economic Affairs think about how can we sustain prosperity in the Netherlands, and also, by the way, also in the countries in the Caribbean that are part of the kingdom, Curaçao, St. Martin, and Aruba, they understand that taking on board all the environmental considerations to truly embrace sustainability is very important. What Carlos Manuel said is that indeed we need to look at sort of the whole of government kind of thing. There's a lot of themes that come together in the GEF, and I think we also need to be practical. One of the things that we feel from the Netherlands perspective is that how we deal with water can actually also speed up the transformative change that we need. Because in climate change, we focus very much on one molecule, that's CO2, but there's the other one as well, H2O, and that is also bothering us. If you look at biodiversity in a way is a beautiful framework, machine, thing to create fresh water. So dealing also in a more integrated way with water and how we manage it or how we not manage it is, I think, very important. So this is just a practical way in which my government is pushing to use scientific insights that we already knew for a long time in practical policies, because we all know that climate change affects the way we're dealing with water, and we all know that we've been so successful, and I say that between parentheses, in mismanaging water, that our whole hydrological cycle has been changing, leading to the fact that crops cannot be grown at the time when we expected it, there's no water when we want it, and there's terrible droughts. So just to sum up, Carlos Manuel has our full support, and let's be aggressive, let's be ambitious, let's not be complacent. The knowledge is there, so let's not be lazy. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much. It's a very exciting day. So I was asked by Tom Bowie, who's been zipping in and out here, the Director of Environment and Global Affairs here in Canada, to plan this Science Day with a focus on learning from youth in the morning and in the afternoon, distilling best practices from collaborative projects with Indigenous cultures to achieve global environmental benefits. So if we could pull up the first PowerPoint, Tom Bowie asked me to start with a brief presentation on new science and thinking, I believe as a warm-up act to Rashid Somalia, who will follow me. So as usual, I will start with, if it comes up, a wonder of nature, which, as you can see, is a brown bear from the Great Bear Rainforest near Klemtu, which I saw in person barely a week ago. And this bear, like many of you in the audience, is a youth by bear standards. He's less than 5 years old. So this morning, we're going to have the youth leaders learning exchange to inspire action. And I said in the afternoon, we'll have indigenous and local knowledge for greater global environmental benefits, or GEBs, with case studies from the Arctic and from the Amazon. Now, this is a picture of a spirit bear in the Kitasoo-Heihei Nation, and is said to have been created by the raven to be sure that the Kitasoo-Heihei peoples never forget that this land was covered in ice. The spirit bear is one of the rarest animals in the world, but also, unfortunately, the ice in the north is becoming much rarer too. So you might want to know, what is the Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel, STAP? We basically provide independent advice to the GEF Council on projects, on policies, and on programs. And if you scan the room, you'll see colleagues of mine who advise the GEF on biodiversity conservation, on climate change mitigation and adaptation, on international waters, on chemicals and waste. And although we are maybe specialists in each of these areas, we increasingly work in an integrated manner. So I might ask if my STAP panel members who are here now just stand up so that you all can ask more questions about us as the week goes on. And some of them are off speaking in other roundtables. So STAP really has two roles. One is to scan and provide advice on the latest science about global environmental issues and possible solutions, and scan the horizon as well for emerging issues that the GEF should pay attention to. Things like circular economy or artificial intelligence, nature-based solutions, blockchain. We also then advise on strategy and programming, and we provide some technical advice. For example, if you're designing a project, how do you test that design for climate risk before it's approved? And the second is, we do actually screen prepared projects, full-size projects, more than $2 million projects, on particular topics, but increasingly looking at and screening what are called integrated programs that are a new mode of working in the GEF, working across geographies and systems for bigger impacts. So, for example, transforming food systems or resilience in cities. And there are roundtables on these integrated programs this week. You all know that there are many drivers that are on pressures on the earth. You know, the first is the human increasing demand for production and consumption. But that's not just about numbers, it's also about equity, the distribution of those resources, and who pays, not just in monetary terms, but in quality of life. And of course, the second pressure, very much with us, is climate change. We know that human activities have unequivocally altered the composition of the atmosphere and increased the Earth's temperature more than 1 degree Celsius since pre-industrial times. The third pressure, of course, ecosystem decline, loss of species, intact forests, fisheries, as well as the ecosystem services that can do things like purify the air and water. And with that, we lose also cultural values and a real sense of place. And the fourth pressure is the element of surprise, of which maybe COVID was the latest, but it surely isn't going to be the last. There's war, there's famine, there's refugees, and we need to think about all these pressures together as we pursue a sustainable planet for the next generation. This is an interactive atlas developed by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the international climate consensus body, and it shows what the world would look like at different temperatures in the coming decades and how precipitation and ocean temperatures would change. And you can look at this at various spatial and temporal resolutions. All of these indicate a very different place at any of those temperature increases. But I think that maybe the youth might, in particular, want to look at this very simple interface or the more complex interface where you can look at spatial and temporal definition at a pretty fine scale. And as we heard from the CEO, climate change is having impacts today. The left two pictures show you the recent fires. The top is Hawaii, and the bottom is British Columbia, very near one of our youth speakers, Sunshine's family. And these are amplified by a dangerous mix of conditions related to climate change. And on the right are pictures of what we also heard from the CEO, the heat, what NASA data confirmed and what billions around the world felt. Temperatures in July made it the hottest month in recorded history. The last 10 years are now the hottest on record, and just last week, Lytton recorded a temperature of 41.4 degrees centigrade, which was the highest temperature anywhere in Canada this year. So climate change is impacting people and ecosystems now around the world, and we, of course, expect many of these impacts to escalate in the coming decades with additional warming. The science of attribution now allows us to tease out, if you will, the climate signal from some events. And as this map shows with the red symbols, 70% of 500 extreme weather events that were analyzed, these are mainly heat, rainfall, flooding, drought, were found to be made more likely or more severe by human-caused climate change. And if you look just at the extreme heat studies, which were 120 of those 500, 92% of them found that climate change made the event or trend more severe. And in fact, in May, Canada was the epicenter of the heat dome, the most significant heat anomaly on the planet. Simultaneously, though, we do have intensifying ecological trends. Land use change for agriculture and cities has driven ecosystem degradation and, as I mentioned, the accompanying loss of ecosystem services. On biodiversity loss, the World Wildlife Living Planet report concludes that global wildlife populations that are monitored have plummeted 70% on average in the last 50 years. And thirdly, of course, there is pollution, waste generation, and pollution of the land, the water, the air, due to human activities. Chemicals we thought were safe, such as PFAS, tailings from mining, ubiquitous plastics, and the impacts on human health continue in an upward trend. In fact, the newest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report highlights how the pace and magnitude of climate change could exacerbate species extinctions, which are already underway. And you can see here that the loss of species at 1.5 degrees is almost doubled at 2 degrees. And if we get to 3 degrees, these losses are about 20 to 80% of the species that are possible. It is certainly not a world we want to leave to this youth generation. And very importantly, often pollution results in unjust exposures. And this map shows risk of harm by combining the exposure to very fine particulates, the particulate matter 2.5 microns, and that's in purple, overlaid with poverty levels, which are shown as deep orange. And you can see that many parts of the world with the most polluted air also have the highest levels of poverty. And so as a consequence, as we deal with environmental problems, we have to involve dealing with it as an issue of justice as well. But we are learning to value nature and nature capital, finally, at long last, gaining attention. At the Convention on Biological Diversity meeting in Montreal in December of 2022, South America's efforts to restore 15 million hectares of the Atlantic forest was declared a World Restoration Flagship. And it is a biodiversity hotspot much in need of attention, which it is receiving through very strong collaborations between communities, individuals, and organizations committed to restoring the biome across 3 countries, Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. And already 700,000 hectares have been restored. And collectively, those actions are creating wildlife corridors for endangered species like the jaguar, the golden lion tamarin. They're securing water supplies for people and nature, and they're building resilience to climate change and creating thousands of jobs. The value that restored and intact ecosystems provide is finally being noticed. In fact, $44 trillion of economic value generation, more than half of the world's GDP, is dependent on nature and its services, and therefore exposed to nature loss. Indigenous and local communities have demonstrated for a long time that we can bend the unsustainable curve and move down towards a green, stable pathway, especially if we involve nature-based solutions, which are working with nature. And they hold promise as an integrated approach to address both climate change and biodiversity loss while supporting a wide range of sustainable development goals. So in a way, these could yield triple wins by being nature positive, climate positive, and people positive. And so if you think about it, for example, restoring habitats along shorelines, that can contribute to climate change adaptation by protecting communities and infrastructure from flooding. But you can also increase carbon sequestration and you can protect biodiversity. So there's actually great momentum to take a combination of climate and nature-based solutions. The drumbeat of science, people are noticing the impacts and they're expensive. We can attribute, we can tease out a climate signal among these. We know that you cannot solve climate change without nature, and you can't preserve biodiversity without tackling climate change. The cost of some of the technological solutions are dropping. We see cities, states, and countries taking action because they must. We see businesses responding and taking the risk seriously, and we see that the investment community is motivated. And so, as I say, when the investment community and the business community is motivated, that's important. And here I show the Staid World Economic Forum, which lists the top 5 long-term risks each year. And you can see in all the green, that green, the environmental risks, have dominated from 2020, which is the top row, down to 2023. These environmental risks are climate change, extreme weather, biodiversity loss, human environmental damage, and the red ones, migration, infectious disease, social cohesion, and livelihood crises, emanate or are certainly related to environmental degradation. I think this group would agree that sustainability rests on 3 co-equal facets: ecological capital, social capital, and economic capital, and human capital. But I think in the last few decades, as the CEO said, we have tended to discount 2 of those, and we have shrunk the human and the environmental capital attention. So as we all work to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we have to grow those Mickey Mouse ears back and value both social and environmental capital collectively. And we can regrow those ears if the strong underpinning of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are shown here as the 4 green and blue ones: clean water, climate, life below water, life on land, if they are recognized, the bottom of this wedding cake, as supporting the social indicators, the middle layer, which in turn supports the top layer, economics. And there is increasing attention across the Biodiversity Treaty, across the Climate Treaty, to embrace nature-based solutions, equity, collaboration, indigenous cultures, women, livelihoods, and making policies work together, as the CEO noted, is so important to deliver positive outcomes. These things are all interlinked. But you know what? Science doesn't have all the answers. Several horizon scanning exercises have been conducted about how our society has been changing and how that can in turn affect the global environment. There's some encouraging trends, like on the left, increasing positive change in people's behavior towards sustainability, environmental activism, youth influence on societal issues, and soon our youth leaders will speak to this. and women, indigenous people, local knowledge, and more on that in our afternoon session. But on the right, we're seeing also signs of concern, erosion of social cohesion, polarization, and attempts to reverse progress made towards equity, gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. So in addition to science, we need behavioral change, insights. For example, STAP found that many projects involve behavioral change in some way or another. At the individual level, maybe you're expecting small farmers to adopt climate-smart agriculture, or producers, soy and ranchers must embrace sustainability, or at the institutional level, policy, government agencies. But that behavioral change is sort of implicit, not always stated as a real objective. And as the cartoon shows on the right, an important middle step needs to be spelled out. The outcome that is clear in projects, as well as those whose behavior is expected to change, and how that's to be achieved, needs to be done, the how, in consultation with communities. They must be designed and embraced collectively and grounded in cultural norms. In addition to behavioral change, we also need systems thinking and engaging stakeholders in depth from the beginning to have meaningful and desirable change. And let me see here. I know this is our policy coherence. Sorry about that. Policy coherence, coming back to you, Carlos Manuel. If we have policies at one level of government that are encouraging something and policies at another level of government that are discouraging or degrading nature, that will not work. And this slide, we do not want the situation that has now been activated, where you see this pair of molly falls working hard on their nesting mound, one moving one way and one moving the other. Now, we also need systems thinking, and this is particularly important to engage stakeholders in depth, as I say, from the beginning. And this, I want to give you one example from a STAP work with GEF in northern Ethiopia. So without the involvement of the communities, the major problem the project developers identified was land degradation from overgrazing. But the farmers couldn't afford to decrease stock or get supplementary feed, so what do? A big conundrum. But when the community worked together to analyze the whole system, they realized, to their great surprise, the assessment showed that the farmers were being underpaid for the weight of their sheep by unscrupulous brokers, but the farmers had no way to know the weight of their sheep. So a simple solution was to provide microfinance to farmers so they could buy scales to give them the capacity to bargain with brokers and sell sheep for a fair price. And that then led to farmers joining cooperatives, selling directly to buyers, and canceling the middle system. So systems thinking, local problem solving, and sometimes simple changes can lead to a significant reframing of a problem. And so knowledge management, also mentioned by you, Carlos Manuel, adding it all up, we can't forget about knowledge management. We must collect data. We must be able to use it. We must be able to evaluate success and failure and learn from best practices. And octopuses have distributed brains across their 8 arms. Well, our knowledge of environmental practices and what works and doesn't work is similarly dispersed across academia, local communities, practitioners, development agents, philanthropies, the public sector, the private sector. We need to combine our lessons learned to advance environmental sustainability quickly to achieve transformational change. And we need to share best practices. We need to convert data into usable information as part of a continuum from learning to uptake to impact. An admirable example of working collaboratively across social, economic, and ecological goals and putting all these elements together is the First Nations of the North Pacific Coast, working with the provincial and federal governments, the private sector, and other actors in the Great Bear Rainforest Agreement, which seeks to conserve 85% of the forest and 70% of the old growth, which would achieve a very high level of ecological integrity. And it will also fulfill social, cultural, and economic objectives of the First Nations and other communities to meet a high level of human well-being. So this was established in 2006. It's the first project finance for permanence in the world, and it has led to conservation, empowerment of youth, employment, food security, and more. And this picture shows the Coastal First Nations, which is an alliance of 9 nations here working with scallops. 3/4 of the employees are indigenous, and I suspect we may hear more about these projects for permanence later in the day. So I just want to come back to the purpose of this session. My generation does not want to be the first generation to leave the next a truly irreversible problem. We are working hard to leave you, to transform for you, with you, social, ecological, and economic systems and leave you a sustainable world. Yes, there are great challenges, but I hope that you have seen there is also great movement towards integration, towards collaboration, towards transformation. And you, the youth, are the drivers of change. You have the ideas, the creativity, and the great energy to shape a better world. So we are here to support you. We want you to share your wisdom with us. And I really want your grandchildren to experience and appreciate these wonders of nature too, as I did in the Kitasoo-Hey-Hey territories in Klemtu last week. So thank you very much. Okay, now for the main event. I won't read you all of Professor Rashid Somailia's amazing CV, but he is the University Killam Professor and Canada Research Chair in Interdisciplinary Ocean and Fishery Economics at the Institute for Oceans and Fisheries in the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs at the University of British Columbia. So if anyone can repeat that. What I want to say mainly, though, is Professor Somalia is one of the most innovative researchers in the future of oceans and really integrates the things I was trying to raise, the social, the economic, the disciplinary, fisheries sector sciences to build novel pathways towards sustainable oceans and fisheries. And there's too many awards to mention, but I do have to say that he was this year's Tyler Prize for Environmental Achievement awardee. So without further ado, I give you Dr. Rashid Somalia.
Good morning. Good morning. Say good morning back. Good morning. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you so much. The 3 speakers, Carlos Manuel, our man from Holland, the Netherlands, and Rosina, all that you've said connects to what I'm going to say here. And I'm focusing on the ocean. But really, whenever I say ocean, think about biodiversity, think about the environment, think about nature. They could easily fit in. I use ocean because that's my research, but actually not only that, the ocean is 70% of the Earth's surface. So once you talk the ocean, you're talking about everything, okay? So that's the first point. So let's get going. There will be time to say thanks at the end, but thank you all for making the time to come here because, you know, the opportunity cost of your time is high. You could have done all sorts of things in the world this morning and you chose to be here. We're all grateful for that. So this is the outline. First of all, I ask the question, why do we need to save the ocean? I know most of you know why, but it's good to talk. And then I go into the 3 things, and I quickly have some conclusion, and I have a slide at the end directed directly to Jeff, you know, so that's good, Jeff and fisheries. So this, I call myself an interdisciplinary oceans and fisheries economist. And this slide, this is my favorite model. If anyone asks you, what is Somalia's favorite model? This is the one. Because it's so down to earth, it's basic. And what it says is that when we, the people, when we go to the ocean, we do basically 2 things. Or when we go to nature, or when we interact with biodiversity, we do 2 things. One, we take all the things we want from nature, from the ocean, all the good stuff, the fish, oil, gas, diamond. We take them into our economy, into our culture, into our social systems. We do what we do with them. At the end of that, what do we produce? We produce waste, plastic, CO2. And where do they go back to? They go to the ocean, to the environment, right? So from the ocean, good things come. To the ocean, bad things go. And all our effort is to make sure that we don't overtake and we don't overpollute. Otherwise, we destroy this amazing source of what we need to live, okay? And to do that, as an economist, I know that economists alone cannot do this. It has to be interdisciplinary. It has to be transdisciplinary. It has to be sectoral, across sectors. It has to be integrated science, not only science, but with policymakers, with people who actually do things, with First Nations, or everybody has to be there. It's partnership, and above all, it's co-creation, right? No single person, no single group can do this. We all have to work together. And that's why GEF is so important. Institutions like GEF that try to bring the world and all our power, brain power, to get us where we want to be. So that's my way of doing economics. And also, I'm not just a theoretical economist. I mean, some of my colleagues, they just like to do their theory, differentiate equations, set to zero, and they're happy. No, I want to publish, but I don't want to leave my publications in the journals. Has to get out to the people who can actually make use of the information. You, the people, the policymakers, and so on. And this work has been appreciated a lot. It's taken me to places that I could never believe. You know that guy. I know him as a prince, and I can't even call him a king because he's a prince to me, right? So that's it, 2 times in the palace talking about fish and how to make the fish better. In the US Congress, at the UN, WTO. So people really like this kind of science. Science that is not just for scientific curiosity, but that helps to make life move in the right direction. So to me, my science is meaningless unless it leads to impact on the ground, on people's lives, on sustainability. So that is, these are just 2 slides to tell you where I come from, and that's what leads me to some of what you will hear. Why do we need to save the ocean? That's a great question, right? I have 1 slide to summarize all that. We are not doing well. I told you about overtaking and overpollution. We are overtaking fish, fishing down marine food web. Take all the big fish, then to the next big one. And what we are doing now, we are harming the bottom with bottom trawlers, knocking off the habitats, right? And so on and so forth. We are truncating the food web, making them more susceptible to impacts like climate change. And we have that thing there, climate change. It has come up again and again because we cannot ignore it. Even politicians who deny this cannot ignore it. They talk about it in a funny way. I'm not going to quote names, but you follow the news, you know. So we talk about global warming. I've begun to talk, and I think many people, I talk about global burning, global boiling, the fish are being boiled, global flooding. You just see it all over. So we have moved away from warming to all this really terrible stuff that you've already had. And how about the pollution? That picture you see down there is actually is a video. If you see this in life and this thing's moving on the wave, your heart will just jump out, I mean, and that leads to empty oceans. How about oil spills? My God. So that's the model. That's why I like the model. Everything I said is in there. And so this is why we need to work hard to protect the ocean. But actually, we are not protecting the ocean for the sake of the ocean. Some of us do. I mean, nature has the right to exist. I believe in that, intrinsic values. But actually, ultimately, when we destroy nature, we are destroying ourselves, our lives. So these are pictures from the FAO at the bottom picture, and from our group here at UBC, just telling you a summary of a lot of data, telling you what kind of fish we take, overfish stocks or OK stocks or underfish stocks. And over time, from 1950, that's the picture you see. More and more, we are taking fish from depleted, overfish, sometimes collapsed stocks. And this has consequences on people. I mean, that guy there is saying, is that all the shrimp I get? I was in Malaysia in June, I believe. And we went to the coast, and there's this lady with a table with a fish trying to sell fish to support her family. I took my camera to snap, and I couldn't do it. The fish were so pathetic, few little fish. And this lady, that's all she has to depend on. I tell you, a few decades, the whole place was flourishing, gone. And down there, you see that other picture. That's an environmental refugee. We're seeing more of it. You know, people move when life is difficult, right? Even the fish, they do that. When it's too warm, the fish move. They follow cold water. Living things don't just sit down and die. So if it's difficult here, people move. And this is not a Mexican thing or an African thing. Every group, every race has had to move at some point in time. So please, let's see this as a global humanity issue. And for us to stop this, we have to make life livable everywhere in the world. You know, make it livable, and then people are not forced to leave their place. And then we have more stability, okay? That's another message for you. Now, I've talked about all the negatives. Now, infinity fish. This I like showing in my book for many reasons, but mainly because I like the title. Infinity fish. So from all the things I'm telling you down now, actually we can turn things around. We can turn things around. We can make it brighter. And if we do, fish will be more valuable than diamond. That's what I like to say. So fish is more valuable than diamond. How do I justify that? Number one, fish is renewable, right? If you treat it well, you manage it well, it can continue to feed you forever or give you income, whatever, livelihood, forever. And mathematically, anything that gives you benefit, even if it's just small, each year, you sum it to infinity, what do you get? Infinity, therefore infinity fish. Diamond is not. People tell you diamond is forever. Don't believe them. Diamond is not. If you have a deposit of diamond and you take 1 ton of it today, you are not going to go back tomorrow and take that same ton. No, it's gone forever, right? And when I said this, it was in Namibia. I had 3 ministers, including the Minister of Minerals and the Minister of Fisheries. When I said this, the Minister of Fisheries just brightened up. And the diamond guy was saying, who is this crazy guy, right? So I said, you know what? So that's one reason. And then I said, I know you guys. I said, oh, I can take my diamond, sell it, and invest it or save it, and it will give me income. I know you are all running deficits. Can you name one country in the world that's not running a deficit? You have to dig hard to really find that. You know, so I better have my fish to continue to feed me than believe that you will invest and feed me. No. So fish is better. The second thing is that fish is valuable for many. Diamond is actually not. Maybe it is. I had a student who challenged me on this. Amazing student. Second year, so he said, no, I don't think fish is. And we had a nice argument, right? But actually, if you think of it, diamond is valuable for a few, at least directly. Fish is valuable for many. How many of you have seen raw cut diamond in your life in this room? Raw cut diamond, one person. Yeah, that's typically it is. A few hands go up. How many of you have eaten fish this week? Yeah, that's our valuable fish. Don't let it go. So the argument I make in this book is that we have an obligation. We, the current generation, have an obligation to pass on a healthy ocean teeming with life to our children and grandchildren, and I'm talking about humanity's children. So even if you don't have a child or grandchild, you are part of this. You are part of the human family. So they too can have the option to do the same, all right? So that's the big point here. And the book is unfortunately expensive. I don't like it. I mean, they say academic book, and next time I'll publish it in a place where it can almost be free, my books, okay? Now, let's get to the 3 points. I know time is always in short supply. I argue that to save the ocean and therefore ourselves, given all the things the ocean does, I've not mentioned oxygen and temperature and moderating and all that. So to save ourselves, we must abandon the notion that we have to take everything, everywhere, all at once. You know where this came from? Yeah, the movie that won 7 Academy Awards or whatever. So I was watching this movie and I say, everything, everywhere, all at once? This cannot apply to nature. If we did this, we'd be in serious trouble, right? So that is the basis of this talk. So let's take the not all at once. And this is a youth meeting, so intergenerational justice, that's what I'm going to briefly talk about to you now. So here, I say this is a quote, an interesting quote from a controversial person. My friends in Europe tell me that Nietzsche is quite a controversial, sometimes crazy person, but I thought this quote is very good. A lot of our troubles in the world, in my view, is from this kind of quotation. Egoism is the law of perspective. You know, as it applies to feelings, according to which what is closest to us, both intertemporally and spatially, is given more weight than anything further away from us. You know, that's a human thing. I don't argue about that. But this is underlying everything. We had a prime minister in Canada who said, oh, we'll start dealing with climate change in 50 years. By then, he's dead and gone, right? So that's the kind of thing. And economists, we use this a lot. I don't have a lot of time to explain discounting, but that's the way economists compare future benefits to current ones, right? Because, you know, even if you take out inflation, you want your dollars now than tomorrow for all sorts of reasons that we don't have time to go through. So this permeates all the analysis we do, and that can lead to problems. So this is, imagine you are going to get a benefit through time, 1 unit, could be 1 trillion, whatever. If you discount it at 7 or 8%, that's what you get over time. Over time, you have, that's the value today is quite high, but with time, by 100 years, it doesn't mean anything if you do what we do conventionally. So I took this on years ago with my colleagues. So I have 5 generations, the youth and current fishers. You fish for 20 years and you retire. If you take the benefits that each generation get, the current generation get that, and the one coming 5th generation will get only that. And this is what we use to do our management. And the question to you is this fair? Do you think this is fair if you use this to weight your decision making today for climate change, for fish? Do you think this is fair? No. Yeah, most people will say no. Very good. But here, there's some magic. When I found this, it was like my eureka, right? What I did here, I said, we were discounting based on people here now. So we are using the discounting clock of the current generation. So I said, how about if we say, I discount my own fish, I get off the stage, my daughter discounts her own fish, she gets off the stage, her grandson discounts it. And if you do that, if you change the clock, the starting point for the discounting, this is what you get. Then actually, suddenly, it's not unfair. So the problem is that we count our future generations' fish or environment as if it is ours. And therefore, the value is low because we will be gone. You have to change it. So that led to a series of papers about intergenerational discounting. These 2 were the first ones we did. I did the first one. Carl Waters was so excited, my fellow prof. And we did this one. And this is a simple application. This is a rebuilding. So if your fish is depleted and you say, we want to rebuild it, if you use the conventional discounting, it will tell you rebuilding is not valuable because of the time component and the discounting. So if you use conventional discounting, that's what the blue graphs are telling you, then you say rebuilding is not beneficial, don't do it. Or dealing with climate change is not beneficial, don't do it, right? But if you think of future generations like I've done in this methodology, then rebuilding is important. And this is a really brief summary of that. All right, so not everything, not all at once, essentially, if you're thinking on how to keep this going, you don't take everything now or in your generation. Third one, biodiversity justice, not everything. We don't have to take everything. This seems to be the philosophy, right? The market system. Anything, just grab it, turn it into money. But come on, there are things we shouldn't, and I'll give you some examples here. I say we shouldn't fish orphans of the ocean. You know what is an orphan of the ocean? You know, we have the high seas and the country waters, EEZs, 200 nautical miles. Everything outside that is a high seas, areas beyond national jurisdiction. And fish in there, fish that live their life, all their life there, we call them orphans of the ocean because they don't have a government making sure people don't overtake them, right? I mean, we have RFMOs that are complex arrangements, but in the main, they are orphans, right? So leave them alone. And they're very special. They live very long. They grow very slowly. If you insist in fishing them, you turn them into a diamond mine. You just fish them out, right? And their papers since 1973, our senior colleague Colin Clark actually showed this. So the point is, I said to a BBC journalist who interviewed me, I said, look here, anything that lives 100 years and over, anything that can live as long or longer than your grandma and your grandpa, please leave them alone, right? Just leave them alone. They've earned their keep, right? So that's the kind of thing I say. We don't have to take everything, frankly speaking. And it's the same with deep sea mining. This is becoming very hot. Everybody thinks there's treasure there. Noodles, not noodles. Noodles, not, noodles are better, maybe. So people think there's so much money there, we have to go, and they have all sorts of justification. But actually, if you think of that, taking all those equipments that to the bottom to break up things in order to take these noodles, I mean, it's going to be very costly, and we don't even know the cost. And I believe that a lot of this optimism is based on your money. Our governments are going to subsidize this thing with that dream, and they find little or nothing, and come back empty and leave the damage. So we need to understand more at the minimum before we do this. So, not everything, please, because if we insist, we're going to mess up. Finally, not everywhere, okay? And this is about biodiversity justice. It's also economic justice. It's climate change, and it's social justice. And I'm going to show a few slides. This is what I explained. Deep blue, EEZs. Deep blue is high sea, light blue is country waters. The high seas is 2/3 of the ocean, and it's half of the Earth's surface. This is massive, right? We catch only 5 to 8% of the total catch from there. It's very unproductive. Most of the production is at the continental shelves. So if we manage that well, we will be able to meet our needs and not have to go into the high seas and do. And what you do, of course, in the high seas will affect, because a lot of the fish go in and out. All right? I actually have a pie chart, which really motivated when we did this analysis. I was blown away. Very simple question. We take the total catch of the fish in the world, total about 100 million tons of fish a year, which is, by the way, equivalent to about 100 million mature cows in weight. So we are taking 100 million mature fish, cows out of the ocean. Can you imagine that? Now, if you analyze that, how much of these are fish that live all their lives in country waters? How much live all their life in the high seas? And how much is fish that we catch that go in and out? That is the picture you have. You see that there's about less than 1% of the fish that live in the ocean, in all their life in the ocean that we catch. And you will be shocked to know that most of those type of fish, you know what they use them for? For fashion products, for perfumes, right? And things like that, or face whatever, right? So really, yeah, so once you have this data, this was what led me and my colleagues to say, the best thing for the world to do, close the whole high seas to fishing. We don't get much. And you go, it's very large, they pump CO2 to do that. And what is more, it's also very unfair, because about 8 countries catch 70–80% of the total high seas, because Guinea-Bissau cannot go there, Bangladesh is not there. But because the fish go in and out, if you close the high seas, then when they come in, all countries, small and large, can benefit from it. We actually calculated the Gini coefficient. And when we did that, the current catch, the coefficient, the Gini coefficient is the way you measure inequality of income or whatever in a country or in a population. We calculated that for the current catch from the high seas. And then we calculated if you close the high seas, and that turned the Gini coefficient from the most unequal society in the world country to the most equal. And do you know the most unequal country in the world? I like to ask this question. Most people say US, right? Actually, it's not the US. Anybody who knows? It's South Africa, yeah. Apartheid showing there. The first time I went to South Africa, Namibia, I was shocked how uneducated the black population was. They were kept out of school. It's showing in the income, right? So yes, there is South Africa. And when you turn that around, then we get the coefficient of the most equal society. And at the time we did this analysis, that country is Sweden, okay? It could be Norway, Denmark, any Finland, but that's what you get in terms of distribution. So it's social justice. I love the paper a lot because of that, you know. So if you care about sharing and making people be able to live in their countries, you better close the high seas. And I call it, you turn the high seas into a fish bank for the world. It helps climate change, it helps biodiversity, it helps economics because you don't have to roam around all over and catch little fish, and it helps social justice. And if you did it well, this is a little animation one of my postdocs did. So you have the high seas, you close it, and then, you know, they get peace when they go in there, and before you know, you have more of this, and you know, when they are tight, what do? They jump into your boat. Whoa! So you're sitting there, yeah, you just catch them cheaply, no CO2 and everything. So yeah, this is what you get, my dear friends. Let's close the high seas to fishing. The new treaty is a good move because if it's implemented well, about 30% will be closed, which is already good, right? You know, I advocate for this, but I know the politics is difficult. But hey, the youth, keep pushing, this will be good. If I own the ocean, tomorrow I'll close the high seas. Yeah. Yes, so this is my summary of these 3 points. Not everything, not everywhere, not all at once. Please, if we're going to have a world that maintains its biodiversity, its ocean, and if we're going to have a world that human beings can thrive in, because we cannot disentangle the health of our environment with the health of the people, frankly speaking. You see it. Yesterday I was going to do a Zoom call with a fellow professor at UBC Okanagan. She wasn't online, and we waited. She was being evacuated. So this looks like distant. It's really happening. It's close. My own colleague, she had to be evacuated, you know. So this is not a joke. So if we did all that, we will start to tackle the threats, I think. If we agree, we're not going to take everything, not everywhere, not at once. We'll stop all these things. And we will stop giving our public money to go and harm the environment, right? That we use the investment to support the environment and therefore the people. This is a paper I pulled together. It was amazing. About 300 scientists we wrote to the WTO and got it published into Science. It's a letter to science. 300 scientists, 300 words is the maximum of this kind of message. So when I presented it to Sister Ngozi, the WTO Director General, I told her this is the most valuable 300 words you will get. It's 1 scientist per word. That's how it is. She loved it so much, she made a special location for us to submit. You know the gentleman from Colombia, he was heading the negotiations. And Sister Ngozi, there's something special about this I like talking about. She's the first woman to lead the WTO. And she's the first person to actually get an agreement. I have worked with about 4 of them, all guys. Yeah, please, yes, let's clap for our ladies, yeah. So this is really, and she's African, right? So I tell them, when I'm in the continent, I say, for Africa to really move, we have to give the same opportunities to boys and girls as we give to men and women, maybe even more. Because if we don't do that, half of our brains or even more, because maybe on average, a woman maybe higher. Let's assume we are the same, right? Half of our brains are gone, and you have to bring them on board. And this also relates to the world. Ngozi is an African. The world has to educate every child on earth. It is our responsibility, right? My dad used to say the good thing about education, you can even never quantify its value, right? You cannot. Who would have told me that I'll be standing here in front of you? A little boy from West Africa, Nigeria and Ghana are my countries, right? So we have to do this because that will also help the environment. All right, what else do I have? Yeah, then we'll stop illegal fishing. A lot of things we will do well. We will do 30 by 30 if we really take this thing serious. And that will help us, right? It's insurance. As an economist, it's a buffer, right? That's why all your pension money is not in one stock, even if the stock is flying today, right? You know, who knows tomorrow? Nobody. So buy insurance, have strong MPAs all over, and we will be good. Yeah, final slide. This is a message to GEF. I know you do work with fisheries. I was involved in the Benguela. You do large marine ecosystems. You have the water program. You have the biodiversity. So here, I think maybe GEF, if you can think hard and find a way to invest more in fisheries, that will directly, like rebuilding fish stocks, you know, helping communities to find ways to live without hanging on the last fish. And anything you can do specifically on fish stocks in different parts of the world, I think will add a lot of value. It will help us achieve infinity fish, you know, infinity blue economy, right? Infinity biodiversity. Isn't that beautiful? This is all possible, and nature is very kind. If you leave nature alone, nature comes back. Nature really is, we are the ones, you know. People tell me, oh, the seal are eating all our salmon. I say, hey, before we went there, the salmon and the fish, they know how to negotiate. They find a nice balance. They are not the problem. We are the problem, okay? So thank you very much for your attention. Thanks to Rosina, to staff, to Carlos, and all of you. Thank you. Yeah. Back to you. Yeah.
Well, I have to say, we are all very grateful that this youth from Nigeria and Ghana has become such a great economist and communicator. And soon we're going to hear from future Rashids. But we can take about 10 minutes for questions, and then we'll give you a 20-minute break. So there are microphones around the room if you want to line up and ask any questions. And please do, Rashid is saying.
I love questions.
Yeah, ask him about the Gini coefficient. Just line up if you want to ask a question. Sure, come on up.
Thank you. Get to the mic.
Good morning, and thank you, Dr. for your kind contributions and also making it so attractive. So I'm part of the youth program with the GEF. So I think I speak on behalf of many colleagues. We would say how we can get engaged with you also in this interesting adventure that you are having. Thank you.
Yeah, so how do you get engaged, right?
Yeah.
With this kind of work? Yeah, so I personally put a lot of effort and time to work with the youth, you know. There is a youth group in Africa called, they say, Our Ocean, Our Life, Our Africa or something, and I give talks to them a lot because and try to motivate them, and most of them feel they are not able to do something. I'm too small, I don't have the resources. What I tell them is, just start something, no matter how small, just start. You start building, and before you know, people notice it, right? Everything big that you see started small, frankly, including the ocean. Yeah? The ocean is made of little drops of water, right? So that motivation, we really have to support. So keep doing what you're doing. Get them to know that nothing is above them, that if they put in the time and effort, they are going to see results. And they shouldn't give up. There are all sorts of problems. I face them. People ask me, oh, are you optimistic? I say, I have no option. I've got to be optimistic. What do I do? Stay in bed? No. And what will Mandela say? You, Rashid, what have you seen? Get up and do something. So motivate people, and I tell you, we can achieve a lot.
I see two more hands.
Two, please, yeah.
Go ahead. Good morning, Rashid. Thank you for a most wonderful and entertaining and powerful talk. I'm Phoebe Barnard, and I used to serve on the Benguela Current Large Marine Ecosystem Governance Body as Biodiversity Director for Namibia. Can we take this as the start of our restoration civilization?
Yeah.
I am working on a youth-led, women-led, collaboration called the Global Restoration Collaborative, bringing together youth and women and indigenous leaders to work together with the old gerontocracy, may I gently say, in the most diplomatic way possible. I'd love to speak with you or anyone else here who's interested to be part of that, to bring together climate restoration, ecosystem restoration, and leadership. Thank you so much for a great talk.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. That's very positive. Is this the beginning of our restorative era or something? I like how you put it. And I see the coalitions, the people of same minds working together like we are doing together. And the more we do that, I think the more we will get going. I think this is an opportunity for me to announce about the Tyler Prize. Yeah, you know, me and my colleague Daniel Pauli is also here, and he's the ecologist and I'm the economist, and we've done a lot of interdisciplinary work, and we won the Tyler Prize jointly. And those of you who know the Tyler Prize, I mean, it comes with money, with some money. And so, yeah. So what we have decided, Daniel Pauli is a very interesting person. His mom is French. His dad is African American, and he's so attached to Africa, you can't imagine. I mean, it's just remarkable. So what we have decided to do is to take a chunk of that and create what we call an Africa UBC Ocean and Fisheries Fellows Program. So the idea is to bring each year, to bring 2 Africans, over here, Africans professors based in the continent, to come to collaborate with 2 UBC profs to design a project, collaborative or whatever, just do something, because we believe in bringing people together, what it can do. And we insist in that it has to be 1 woman, 1 man, right, each year. So we've got to get that balance, because I'm really a strong believer that until Africa really promotes women properly, we're going to lose a lot. Just look around the world and see the amazing work they're doing, all over, you guys in the room. And if you handicap half of your population, you are in deep trouble. You know, so we're doing this, and you know what? I have 2 female deans. My Dean of Arts, Claire, and Dean of Science, Megan. They love this. They love it so much. They've doubled each of them have doubled our contribution. And my provost says, we want to do this forever, infinity. So put in an endowment we'll have together to keep this going. So this is another way we create your restorative world that you mentioned. Yeah, let's link up. 2 more.
We'll break.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for this so brilliant presentation.
Thank you, sir.
So you know, last 30 years, GEF has been investing, and a lot of experts have been doing, like you, a great job. But we see the resources and the risk have been increasing. So if I ask you only 1 recommendation for the GEF, what would you recommend for the GEF to do? Thank you.
Jeff, what do you want to do? Tell me. That's a tough question, right? Because, you know, this idea of buying insurance, I think, is very important, right? And the idea that there are things we just have to leave alone, nature, I mean. So protection is important. Why? And I'm an economist. In general, economists don't like protection. We want to do everything anyway, all at once. But I think if we want to regulate our relationship, we need to do this. So restoration is important for fisheries. Wherever we can restore, let's do that. We increase the abundance instead of maintaining the misery or taking it down. That would be, and yeah. But this is not a one, of course, there's no one panacea here, but yeah. Thank you.
Yes. Oh, wait a minute. Well, now there are more questions.
We got 2 more.
So, yeah, 2 more. Was there a third there, too?
Yeah, a third, yeah.
Okay, 3 quick ones.
Okay. I was just curious, what was the reaction from the WTO after you said the subsidies were bad and you had data to prove that?
Yeah, so yeah, you know, the WTO, all the DGs I've dealt with, and I started with Pascal Lamy, he's the one in the photo, and all the DGs actually know this is a problem, and they want to do something. As far as I understood from our conversation, Pascal Lamy, for example, read our report, page to page, had markers on gave me and two of us an audience. We sat with him 2 hours in the. So they all believe this, but you know they are just secretaries really, and they try to. The power is in the countries, and so you end up if one country says this and they don't sign on, then it becomes a problem, right? If you remember India, for example, just getting to the last minute, they said they wanted the developing countries to be excused for 25 years. Can you imagine that? I was there with my students were watching this and we started panicking, right? 25 years by then we've taken down our system, right? But somehow they managed to negotiate and I think they got a two-year grace to adjust. So the countries, that's where the pressure will have to come in order for the WTO to really implement this, yeah. Okay, please, come on.
Oh, I'm very short, but
Yeah.
I'll pick it up.
Yeah, you can do that. Yeah.
My name is Tumaini Charles Marajani. I come from Tanzania. Hakuna Matata, Zanzibar, Kilimanjaro. I am the executive chairperson of Tanzania Climate Change Initiative, but also the regional focal point for the GEF CSO network for East Africa. Congratulations for the nice presentation.
Thank you.
I was chatting with my group and the first request, we have about 150 million people speaking Swahili worldwide.
Yeah.
And one of the requests is if this book can be supported by GEF and be translated in Swahili.
Oh, yeah.
And also in some other languages, those indigenous people in India, in Pacific and others can understand.
Wonderful.
We really need this information to go down to the local people.
Super. Yeah.
To see how important fish are. But the other thing is we have the CSO Global Group working with GEF.
Yeah.
We would like to work with you.
Yeah.
Because I can give you an example of Eastern Africa where we have more than 700 organizations under my forum in East Africa. We are bringing energy together to make sure that GEF activities are really published everywhere and people can see the work GEF are doing. So we like to work together because I can tell you about 49% of the people who are working in the processing of fish are women.
Yeah, that's true.
Of course, most of the fishing is done by men. But the processing, 49% are women. But guess what? The working conditions, the equipment they use to fish, you know, sometimes they use improper fishing equipment. So we need to support them.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's finance, but in most cases it's capacity building, education, right fishing equipment, so that they don't fish those small ones before they are at the right age of fishing. So we would like to recommend if we can work together with the GEF CSO network because our visibility goes as more as global, but also we need to request from you, from your recommendation, if the book can be translated and if GEF can support to strongly publish that book to different languages, because I guess even in this room there are some people struggling to understand some of the issues because of the language barrier. So imagine for those local communities down to the Congo. So thank you very much and congratulations.
That's fantastic. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is really, it just shows the kind of, the impact of this and his reaction. And I'm here to work with you, sir, okay? Yeah, we'll work together, yeah.
And I think you are the last question.
Thank you so much. My name is Priska with the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. And when you're, I'm an advocate for biodiversity conservation as well as animal welfare. So when you're speaking of protecting oceans, I'm also thinking about how do we also protect fish for themselves, for their lives. And you mentioned that, you know, science is meaningless unless it's create impacts. And while we're looking at creating the oceans for the benefit of us humans, future generations, how can we also protect the oceans for the lives of the fish, for the lives of other marine species that depend on those ecosystems to survive and thrive. And so it's more of like a personal question, I guess, like, how likely is, for example, the call to ban fishing in the high seas, how likely is that to succeed, and how do we also address the challenges that come with the conflicts that arise with conservation, addressing socioeconomic needs, as well as the welfare of the animals themselves?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very, very good question. You know what you reminded me? At the last UN conference, I think that was in Portugal, I gave a talk, and one of the things I said, which really got the room crazy, I said, when you mention food security, everybody thinks about people, right? But how about the food security of the whales and the seals, right? They're living things. They need to live too. And that is why your point has really raised and is deep and important. And, at the end of the day, if we allow nature to thrive in its fullness, we will be the beneficiaries, actually. Because if you look very closely, conservation and how well we do are quite interconnected, seriously, in my view, right? So yes, we should think broadly about not just taking the fish is not just only to feed us and carry us along, but they also have the right, and you have to do the balance. That's why I'm saying not everything, actually, in my talk. So thanks for that.
So wise words from one of our champions of the planet. Let's take a 20-minute break. Rashid will be here, and the youth panel will follow right at 10:30. Let's thank him once again for magnificent
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Rosina. You did it.